Well, what do Nissan, Sony, JP Morgan, and Target all have in common? All were victims of cyber hacks and incurred millions in damages. And experts warn that cyber attacks will only get more prolific, and that's why more and more companies are adding cyber insurance to protect themselves. To break down what cyber insurance is, we're joined by Simon Gilbert. He is the managing director of Elmore Insurance Brokers, a specialist insurance broker for cyber insurance. Simon, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Michelle.
So, Simon, let's start off with the size and scope here. How big is the current global cyber insurance market, and what are the growth projections?
Well, let's start from the beginning. Back in the 2000s, the market was in its infancy. But in 10 years, up to 2010, it grew to about $1.5 billion in gross written premium. That's increased to about $3 billion in 2015 and is expected to grow almost threefold to $10 billion in 2020.
All right, that's really tremendous growth there. But Simon, what exactly is cyber insurance? What type of claims would a cyber insurance policy typically cover?
We like to advise our clients to break down coverage into three main areas: the event management, the financial loss, and the liability. A good way to just demonstrate this is looking at the target attack in 2013. There you can see where they had a major breach. They had a lot of event management there to notify customers of the issue, but also they suffered a significant amount of financial loss, both in business interruption, but also in fines and penalties issued by regulators. And finally, the liability piece in terms of liability to their customers from a breach of the data.
All right, so what would a cyber insurance then cover in terms of payout?
It's always interesting to see the different policies and how they respond. And normally there's no one cyber attack which is the same. So when we're looking at cyber insurance, we have to really consider the type of company which we're looking at and what the right type of coverage is to be protecting it for.
Simon, let's look at the Sony hack as another example, another one that made huge news and showed how vulnerable corporations can be. In that hack, movie scripts, sensitive information about film stars, and private conversations between Sony executives were leaked. So what would be covered in that case and what was not covered in that case?
Well, I wasn't personally involved in the incident which Sony was involved in terms of understanding the exact cover that they had, although the hackers did publicize the details of the policy online. So it really shows just the extent of the type of information which can be disclosed in these types of breaches. But the cyber insurance would have helped Sony to pay for the costs and expenses in getting forensic investigators to look at the damage and the extent of the loss, but also trying to help them recoup some of the losses which they may have suffered during the period of the hack. If we look at what's not covered by cyber insurance.
Simon, what about a case like the Ashley Madison one, where there were a lot of personal people compromised? It was that extramarital affair website. Some 33 million members saw their customer data go public. What would a cyber insurance policy cover in that regard?
Well, this is really where cyber insurance comes to its forte, because when looking at protecting personally identifiable information of individual customers, cyber insurance looks at the investigation of the IT systems after a hack, but also the notification involved. Then to notify them is not an easy task, and insurance helps both manage that process and also provide some sort of compensation for the customers if necessary.
I'm sure it's very tricky to figure out exactly what that compensation should be. But Simon, let's talk about the issue of customers, because really every business is connected to the internet right now and would have a customer database of some sorts. So which companies are buying cyber insurance and who should be buying cyber insurance?
Sure. Well, traditionally, it's always been companies storing or processing personal identifiable information of individual customers. But this we're seeing changing and evolving into organizations who see the reliability and the connectivity of their systems as so business critical, and the data which is on them, that they're buying cyber insurance to ensure that they've got protection to respond to these types of events, both in terms of the response, but also potential fallout with regulators, and as well as liability to its customers following it.
Well, you mentioned regulation very quickly. How does regulation fit in here?
Well, regulations will be different from each country. We saw the recent EU data protection regulation changing, whereby there is a notification provision similar to what is in place in the US. But what's quite unique is the large fines, which could be globally relevant for organizations should they be victim of a breach, up to potentially 4% of global turnover.